Well, hey there, and welcome back to Stuff in Excel. I'm Richard, and what we're going to do in this video is look at how to create user-defined fields inside a pivot table. Occasionally, you're going to have a pivot table, and you need to add a column, maybe a sum, or maybe a total, maybe percentages that isn't in the original data, but you want a new computed total in your pivot table. And it's not going to be convenient to go back and add it to the original data. You want to add it directly to the pivot table. And I'm going to show you how to do that. Let's start with this data file. We've got a number of companies that owe us money. We tell what state they're in, what region they're in. And we can tell the current amount that's owed to us, the amount that's over 30 days old, over 60 days old, over 90 days old, and over 120 days old. Obviously, this is an accounts receivable aging schedule. Now, the first thing we want to do is put this into a pivot table. So there's a couple ways to do it. Of course, we can click in here without changing the data, and let's do that first. So we'll just go here and we will simply go Insert Pivot Table, and remember, Excel will pick up the entire contiguous range of data. So I go and insert a pivot table. I can put it on a different worksheet, and there it is on sheet 1. We're going to call that pivot table. And I'll rename it. And you notice every time you create a pivot table on another sheet, it does add another sheet. So I'm going to add company. I'm going to add my 5 columns of data. So I've got this pivot table, and I might want to add a total column to this. So if I let's just try add total. And I'll say equals sum of all those amounts. Oops. And it creates the amount, and I can copy it down the page. The problem is that this no longer appears over here in my fields of data. The total column is not there. And if I wanted to do a pivot table with just the total, I could not do that. And the reason I cannot do that is because I did not add this to the pivot table itself. It's just an extraneous column of data. So that's not going to work for us. So let's get rid of that. And let's try going back to the original data and add it there. So if I add a total over here and say equals sum and highlight those amounts, and see, it doesn't want to do it. And let's see, why doesn't it want to do it? Well, it's because I've got minus signs in here instead of zeros. So what we will do instead, I see why. Actually, the problem is the formula was wrong. So there it is. And I can copy this down. And we'll make a column so we can see it. Now I'll go back to my pivot table, and I will try to update the pivot table for this. So I'll click anywhere in the pivot table analyze, go to refresh, and we notice it does not refresh the table. That's because this table is tied to the original data range, which is right here, because we did not set this up in a table to start with. Okay, so that's a problem, right? We could go back and redo the whole thing, but we really don't want to do that. It's too difficult to do that. If we redid this as a table, then added the total column, the pivot table will pick it up. But it's much easier if we just go in and add a column directly to the pivot table. So how do we do that? Well, it's pretty simple. We're going to just click anywhere in the existing table, and we're going to go up to the top of the page, and we're going to click on Pivot Analyze. Now, some places may have Pivot Table and Analyze as separate tabs, depending on what version of Excel you have. This version I have is Excel 2021. It has Pivot Table Analyze as a single tab, and then Design is over here. So I click on Pivot Table Analyze. I'm going to go to this box that says Fields, Items, and Sets. So when I click on that, it brings me up an option to do a calculated field or a calculated item. You know, calculated item is grayed out. I cannot actually do that now, and that's because I'm adding a column and not a row. If I had clicked originally over in column A, the calculated item would have been an option for me, but it is not an option because I did not click in that column A. Right now we're just trying to create a calculated field. I'll do a separate video on how to create a calculated row. So we're going to do calculated field. We'll click on that. It's going to bring up this dialog box. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a field, and we're going to call it total owed. And I do not have to obey the naming conventions when I do this. So I'm going to go down over here and say add. And it's going to add that as a field for me. And now all I have to do is I have to create the formula to tell it how to add it. So I can actually go in and click on each of these, but the easiest thing to do is just double click on current. You notice right now it says equals 0. I'm going to double click on current, and it put current in there. I'll hit the plus sign. I'm going to double click on over 30. It added it. Now you'll notice that over 30 has a quote mark or a apostrophe going on either side of it. That is because current was a single string of characters. Over 30 has a space in it. So it's going to read that as a block, and it's telling me that is a block of data, and it reads that as if over space 30 is one block of data. So I'm going to hit the plus sign. I'll do the same thing with over 60. Plus sign over 90. Plus sign over 120. And I'll say insert field. Now when it does this, I want you to see something. Right here, see that total load? It's there. It's not dark yet. But when I hit insert field, or excuse me, hit OK, it's going to now that's going to be there. Notice it's darkened and it's been added to my table. Okay. So now I've got the data. Now if I click on this, you notice it's not a formula. It's just a number. I can see that up here. It's not, but the formula is there, and I know that because if I go up to Fields, Items, and Sets and click on List of Formulas, I can see where that formula is. So that's, and I actually put that on a separate table. We don't want to do that, but we'll go back to Pivot Table. So I've got this data item here, and let's say in addition I want to add another column, and that is the amount of discount that somebody will get if they pay me early. So I'll add discount. Again, I can't do it that way, right? I have to go up and go to, I click anywhere in the field, I go up to Pivot Table Analyze, and I go to Fields, Items, and Sets. I'm going to do Calculated Field. I'm going to call it Discount. And now it's going to be my total owed times 0.10 or 10%. And I'll hit OK. And it's going to create that for me as well. And here it is over in my fields. If I wanted to, I could click off all these other ones and just show the discount and the sum owed. What if I wanted to change this formula? I decided I don't want a 10% discount. We only want a 2% discount. So it's easy to do. We simply click back in the table. We go back to Fields, Items, and Sets. We're going to go to Calculated Field. Now what we're going to do is we're going to do the drop-down menu. We're going to pick one of the fields that we calculated, and it's going to be discount in this case. We'll click it, and we're going to go over here. Now it's changed from add to modify. And so we'll click on modify, and it's going to allow us now to modify this formula. And I can change that to 0.02. And you'll watch over in the column C, when I hit OK, focus on column C, you notice all those discounts now changed. So that's how we add a calculated field to a pivot table that we can then use when we're creating new pivot tables because we've created the new calculated fields.